Well, my friends, we hear a very disturbing account in this first reading from the first book of Kings. And I want to delve into it with you a little bit because it shows us another lesson about the corruption of power. You know, power is given to people in various positions. It might be power in the church. It might be power in civil government. It might be power in a corporation, but various people in various positions, and no doubt many of you as well, have various forms of authority and power. How are we to understand this in spiritual terms? Well, we are to understand it as service. The only reason that the Lord allows us to have positions of authority, power, and influence is so that we can serve Him and His people, so that we can serve the good of the kingdom, the good of the church, the good of the nation, the good of the community, the good of our families, so that we can increase people's security, that we can protect their rights, so that we can secure justice. Jesus says when it comes to our own personal offenses that people might commit against us, have a generous spirit. Realize that, we don't have to fight and quibble over every little thing that is done against us or demand, every little wrong be corrected. Have a generous spirit. You'll be more at peace. Turn the other cheek. But we are not allowed to turn anyone else's cheek. And that's where we have to be very careful that we distinguish here. When we're in a position of authority, that carries with it responsibility to protect and preserve the rights of all those that are affected by our decisions. So, now Ahab was an evil king. We've been seeing that. Last week's readings brought that up very clearly as he was persecuting the prophets and Elijah the prophet in particular. Ahab was, according to the Old Testament, the king that did the most evil, more than any of his predecessors, and a big evil influence on him, as we see played out in today's reading, was his evil wife Jezebel. Now, what does he do here in this particular passage? As we just heard, you see the abuse of authority, and Jezebel feeds into his arrogance, his pride, and his greed. He sees this vineyard next to him. Now, he's the king of Israel. But one of the ways that having power and having authority literally twists and darkens our mind and clouds our judgment is that we think that we have authority over everything. It's so easy for people in authority to fail to recognize the limits of their authority. This, by the way, in an election year as we are in now, is, as I always say, the first question we have to ask of those who want to occupy some position of government authority. The first question we have to ask them is, do you understand the limits of your authority? If we were to put you in that office for which you are seeking votes, do you understand where your authority ends? And do you understand that authority or power is service? We'll get back to that point because the Lord Jesus Christ and the Christian faith actually revolutionize and transform our politics. But we'll get back to that later on in this homily. First, let's look at how Ahab falls into this temptation, egged on by his wife. The temptation is, because I see this vineyard next to me and it looks good, and it no doubt is good, well, therefore I can have it. No, Ahab, you may be king of Israel, but that doesn't mean you can have it. You don't have authority over somebody else's ancestral heritage. Just because you have the title of king doesn't take away the title of ownership from Naboth over his own vineyard. And I say this obvious point, my brothers and sisters, but it's not. The problem is it's not always so obvious to those in power and authority. They blur the lines, the boundary lines that say your authority stops here. And this is a spiritual problem. Ahab killed, again with the active cooperation and machinations of Jezebel, he killed in order to steal. And this whole sad story unfolds as a commentary on the absolute abuse of power, abuse of authority. But notice, with the killing and the stealing, there's a third sin that is wrapped right in with them, and this is true all throughout history. Wrapped up with the killing and the stealing is lying. Smearing Naboth's reputation, committing the sin of slander or calumny, which we have preached about in recent days as well. Making up a story that somebody did something wrong that they didn't do. Jezebel sends out these letters, and she says, get 2 scoundrels to face him, that is Naboth, innocent man. Oh, no, he did nothing wrong. All he did was he had a nice vineyard, and he said, well, this is mine. He has every right to assert that it's his. Doesn't matter if Ahab is the king or the garbage collector. This is my vineyard. He had every right to say that. And so Jezebel says, get 2 scoundrels to face him and accuse him of having cursed God and king, penalty for which is stoning. Okay, Jezebel, when did he curse God and king? And how? And where is the evidence? Remember, nobody has to prove their innocence. Those who accuse somebody have to prove the guilt. Again, nobody has to prove their innocence. If I say to you, oh, I know that you stole some candy bars the last time you were in the supermarket, how are you going to disprove that? Do you have a videotape of every minute of your life that would demonstrate that not one of those minutes was occupied by reaching into the shelf and putting some candy bars in your pocket? You can't prove your innocence. If I think you stole some candy bars, I can assert that, and it's impossible to disprove it. But you don't have to disprove it. That's the good news. The good news is the burden is not on you to say I never stole any candy bars. The burden is on me to prove that you did. If I'm going to assert it, I better have the proof. I better have video from the store's security camera showing you grabbing those candy bars and putting them in your pocket. Otherwise, if I don't have that kind of proof, or if I don't have, a couple of witnesses that were standing right there with me and say, oh yeah, that's the person on Tuesday at 5 o'clock. She stole those candy bars. I saw her. I was there in the store. Look, here's my receipt. And you turn to that person and say, were you in the store at that same time? Oh yeah, here's my receipt. It proves that you were there. Unless we can pull together that kind of evidence, you know what we have to do who are making the accusation? We have to keep our mouths shut. That's what we have to do. Oh, you stole those candy bars. Oh yeah, prove it. I don't have to prove my innocence. You have to prove my guilt. So Jezebel, when did Naboth curse God and king? And of course the answer is he didn't. But she literally got him stoned to death so that Ahab, abusing his authority and not recognizing its limits, went ahead and took possession of the vineyard. Shame on them both, sinners that they were. You and I have to be aware that this kind of abuse of authority is happening all the time. Now, I'm going to give a couple of examples. Because, again, and I want to give an example, first of all, of the respect for the boundaries of authority that I've seen in practice in the civil arena. And then I want to give you 2 examples of abuse of authority. And false accusations, too. Some people, and I'm just amazed at this, but, we're in an election season, so people are going to say crazy things. But they talk about the President of the United States. Some people refer to him as he thinks he's a dictator. Friends, it's exactly the opposite. I happen to have the privilege of communicating with the president and his close advisors, and he has the utmost respect for the boundaries of his authority. I, for example, was witnessing how on a conference call on which we were speaking about a a new measure that he took to enhance our religious freedom. Here was the matter. If a group like Priests for Life or some church contracts with the government for some particular service or project, you have to fill out forms, you have to go through certain requirements and certain hoops. But the fact that we are believers, that we are faith organizations, should not make it any harder for us to enter into these contractual arrangements than it is for groups that have nothing to do with the church, right? We should all be on an equal footing as citizens of the United States. And what happened was that, of course, our laws prevent, by law, certain forms of discrimination. You can't discriminate against somebody based on sex or national origin or anything like that. There are certain provisions in the law. Now, the laws are made by Congress. All right, so a president can't just go in and change those laws. But what President Obama did in the previous Democrat administration is that he added a requirement, not by law, but by regulation, okay, because that's under the authority of the president. You could add a regulation that there shouldn't be discrimination based on sexual orientation. And so now this created a difficulty for certain groups of faith that are saying, well, listen, we want to, our teaching is that God established marriage as between one man and one woman. And so, they don't want to be subject to accusations that they're discriminating simply because they're living out their faith, right? So what did President Trump do? He and his administration proposed new regulations that took that requirement out of there. So and notice, they took that requirement out because it wasn't put in there by law. If it were there by law, if the Congress had put it in there, the president wouldn't be able to take it out. And so he and his administration acted under those limits, under the boundaries of the authority. They did something good that was helpful to church groups and faith groups, but they did it very precisely. They only took out the burdensome thing that President Obama had put in. They did with the authority of the president what the authority of another president had done before in the opposite direction, but they didn't tamper with what was there by law, because any changes in that part of it have to be done by the lawmaking body, which is the Congress. So hopefully this is clear that you have this particular deference to authority. It's the same thing that the president is doing in terms of how the pandemic has been managed, or when there are disturbances and riots in different cities. The president always points to the local authorities. The governors have to take action. The governors have to get proper medical supplies. The governors have to deploy their police force. The mayors have to cooperate. This principle of subsidiarity, not only is it written into the Constitution, but it's written into our Catholic social teaching that those authorities on the more local level have their obligation. Now, if they're not able to meet them, then the higher authorities are there to help. And the president, of course, makes that very clear as well. So those are examples of the respect for the limits of your authority. Ahab, has some lessons that he can learn here. There was also a striking incident in our recent American history of the overstepping of authority, and it's very much similar to this, where Jezebel creates this lie about Naboth. He cursed God and king. We actually had an attempted coup in the United States of America over recent years. Democrat operatives who were not happy with the results of the 2016 elections actually tried to stage a coup to get the president, the duly elected president, out of office. Now, I don't know how much you've read about this in detail. I'm sure you've heard things on the news, over these recent years about the Russia collusion investigation and the Mueller report and the FISA warrants obtained by the court. What basically, in a nutshell, what happened is that certain people in the intelligence agencies of the United States lied to a court to get a warrant to spy on President Trump's first campaign and then on his administration, to actually spy based on a lie. They made things up. And then he had a phone call with the president of the Ukraine, and again, they made things up to say that he was engaged in illegal activity and quid pro quo, and he was making promises for favors, and none of it was true. This is a perfect example of what we see in today's first reading. When those who have a certain position, a certain authority, a certain amount of power, use it to carry out personal vendettas, use it to achieve their own political aims, exceeding the bounds of their authority and exceeding the bounds of morality, lying about somebody and literally trying to take what is not theirs. We see this going on also in the church. Those who have authority in the church, pastors, for example, bishops, have to understand the boundaries of their authority. Let me again give you an example. It happened to us. Priests for Life is an independent corporation. Knights of Columbus are also. EWTN is as well. There are a lot of all these different ministries in the church. When you start looking at specifically how they are structured and how they operate, it becomes very complex and very detailed. But basically, you can make a simple distinction between, when you ask the question, well, who controls this entity? You know, these entities are not controlled by bishops. These entities are controlled by their own boards of directors. They're separate civil entities, corporations. So we have our board of directors, we have our bylaws, and although we have the greatest respect and loyalty to the shepherds of the church, our bishops, you hear me preach about that frequently, nevertheless, that doesn't mean that they can interfere with the lawful autonomy of a ministry that has a separate governing board. You understand what I'm saying? In other words, the bishop has certain authority in his diocese. It's carefully defined by canon law. He can assign his priests, for example. But he can't go in and make internal decisions about how a ministry is going to function, or try to replace the members of the board of directors on that ministry. And yet that's actually one time what happened to us. We were told by a bishop in the church that, oh, here's some people that I want you to put on your board of directors. Now, we're open to any kind of helpful advice if in fact we find that helpful, but the bottom line is that any change that is made in the board of directors of an organization is the decision of the organization. And so in that instance, I said, I will propose this to our board, and then, according to our bylaws, the board will vote on it. And the board voted and made their decision not to include these various members. And then I was told I was not being cooperative or obedient, whereas meanwhile we have an independent organization, an independent board, a set of bylaws, civil attorneys, canonical attorneys, financial advisors, and all these people are saying, here's how this operates. I did not even have the authority. I did not even have the authority to put those people on the board. And here's somebody who thinks that he can throw his weight around, tries to change something that he has no authority to change. That's not lack of cooperation. That's simply recognizing who has the right to do what. So back to Ahab. Give me your vineyard to be my vegetable garden, since it is close by, next to my house. I'll give you a better vineyard in exchange, or if you prefer, I'll give you its value in money. Hey, fair enough. Make the offer. If Naboth agreed to it, everything's fine. No harm done. But Naboth didn't agree to it. Naboth said, this is mine. Ahab didn't respect the limits of his authority. People in the deep state who tried to oust President Trump from office, they failed, by the way. They went all the way through an impeachment process, which was a scam and a charade. They didn't succeed, but they were surpassing the bounds of their authority, and they were making up lies. Same kind of problem is happening. And some in the church don't recognize the limits of their authority either, and they have no respect for the legitimate autonomy of other ministries in the church. They should be fostering that autonomy, not trying to crush it. A very, very explosive letter came out recently from Archbishop Carlo Maria Vigano, who used to be the Apostolic Nuncio of the United States, the Pope's representative in our country. And he said, it was a letter to the president, and he said, let me just read this. There are mercenary infidels who seek to scatter the flock and hand the sheep over to be devoured by ravenous wolves. It is not surprising that these mercenaries are allies of the children of darkness and hate the children of light. And then this is a very, very key phrase. He says, just as there is a deep state, there is also a deep church that betrays its duties and forswears its proper commitments before God. Let me say one final thing about the boundaries of authority, and that is pro-choice public officials, pro-abortion public officials. Like Ahab, they completely disregard the limits of their authority. Let me tell you, friends, why and how they do this. They think that because they are in let's say, a position in Congress, okay, we have many pro-abortion members of Congress, and by the way, with very few exceptions, all the Democrats in Congress are pro-abortion, and all the Republicans are pro-life when we come to the question of the rights of the unborn. And they vote that way too. Just look at the voting records, it's all public information. Or the governor of a state, for example. The Democrat governors, they want to pass and sign all kinds of laws expanding and protecting the right to kill children by abortion. Here's the problem. They don't have that authority. And this is something the church teaches very clearly. Our bishops teach this in their document, Living the Gospel of Life. John Paul II teaches this in Evangelium Vitae, that no one in public authority can write a law or issue a decree that says it's okay to kill a baby. The point here is not only that it's morally wrong, it's obviously morally wrong, but we're saying it's legally impossible. Oh yeah, it has the appearance of legality because they're signing all the right papers and everything. But the law does not give any authority to anyone to kill a baby or to authorize someone else to kill a baby. It cannot happen. It's not part of their authority. When we elect someone to be a member of Congress, or someone gets appointed to a court, or someone gets elected president or governor, we're not giving them veto power over human rights. We're putting them in a position where they're supposed to be protecting and defending human rights. That's the difference. We have a type of government here in the United States that says, according to our founders, that governments are instituted to secure the rights which the people have directly from God, starting with the right to life. God gave us that. No human authority can take it away. When a public official thinks that they can take it away, they believe in a different type of government. They believe in a different type of government, which John Paul II, in Evangelium Vitae, paragraph 20 to be precise, calls tyranny. He says it is a tyrannical form of government when the strong can kill the weak. Brothers and sisters, let's take this into account as a key lesson for this election year, and as we look at everything that is happening both in the church and in the state. Let's learn the lesson from the evil king Ahab, who had Naboth killed so that he can take that vineyard. He had no right to the vineyard, he had no right to kill, and he had no right to lie about the reputation of Naboth. May all those who exercise any kind of authority understand that when Jesus Christ came into the world, He gave access to each and every one of us to God the Father. He made us sons and daughters of the Father. That revolutionizes our politics. That means the voice of the people matters. That means we have a say. The pagan view of politics and government is that the king can get up and issue whatever kind of decree he wants, and the people neither have input into it nor recourse against it. But when Jesus Christ comes and begins this new humanity and makes us sons and daughters of the Father, we all have access to the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords, and His Spirit living within us. We matter. And that's why those in authority are in a position of service, not lording it over them. Jesus makes this very clear. They make their greatness and their importance felt. Oh, they throw their weight around. Let it not be that way with you. Let him who wants to serve, let him who wants to be great, serve the needs of others. That's greatness, that's power, that's authority, that's love. Let us serve one another's needs in all humility. And may those who hold and seek public office always stay humbly within the limits of their authority and serve the rights of all of the rest of us, sons and daughters of God. Amen.